So the second duel in Detroit race was a vast improvement over the first one. Pretty excellent race. In fact, mostly excellent throughout the entire thing. Entertaining, some exciting twists and turns, some pretty major crashes, and a little bit of controversy because we always have controversy. But one of the moments is not controversial enough for me to rip off and bump my McLaren hat this time, go full Puma hat and rant, but I will touch on it briefly. We did have another NBC faux pas. The picture cut out again, similar to what we had seen at St. Petersburg. Many people were calling this strike three. I've been saying for a while that NBC is kind of has used up a lot of their mulligans. We had the whole schmozzle at the end of the season last year when they were balancing NASCAR red flag coverage with the start of the championship decider in Sonoma, where of course they missed the most important lap of the season, where the championship was essentially decided. So that was strike one. Then we go to St. Petersburg, first race of the brand new contract, and they miss, I think it was like 10 laps of the race in complete radio silence. And then we had essentially the same situation happen again today in the TV coverage, where there had been some audio issues, which I had picked up on. I didn't tweet about or anything because it may have been on my end. Turns out it wasn't on my end because eventually the picture just completely cut off. And they missed one of the exciting restarts. I think it was like one of the last restarts of the race. And we also missed whatever happened to Takuma Sato. Apparently they had contact with Felix Rosenqvist, a bit of a continuation of the storyline we saw between those two drivers yesterday. But again, we never caught a replay either. And they got the picture back. I think it was within a minute or so. They cut to commercial real quick, ran a couple of ads, and then came back, and it was good. So at least they've learned from St. Petersburg, but apparently this is actually the third instance of this. Now, I was driving to Indianapolis at the time of the Mid-Ohio race for IMSA, where apparently this happened as well. For whatever reason, they've had trouble with this, with keeping their picture going. They lost St. Pete, they've lost Mid-Ohio, and now they've lost the picture at Detroit. I don't know why this keeps happening. Obviously, I don't work for them. I'm sure they're well aware of it, but it's happened so much now, I almost think it's not going to change until it happens at a NASCAR race. And unfortunately, that's just the way things are. Because, of course, we know NASCAR Nation is loud and vitriolic on Twitter and social media. And we're a NASCAR race to lose 20 laps of coverage because the power goes out. They probably wouldn't be as forgiving as the IndyCar fans, and I'm hoping it doesn't happen. I hope whatever this issue has been that has seemed to have plagued, I guess, IMS Productions or NBC, whoever runs that. I know they blamed the last IndyCar one on IMS Productions, so it's possible it's on them. Who knows? But it's disappointing when you lose laps of the race at all. And then the unfortunate reality was they also didn't show the part of the race that they missed, because there was an important moment in there with Sato going from 6th or 7th all the way back to 15th, and nobody had an idea of what was going on. But anyway, we need to stop talking about the TV coverage because there was an actual race today, and it was pretty good. So the story of this race really comes down to that first lap crash in Turn 3. And Turn 3 was the action spot all day long, but with defending Indy 500 winner Simon Pagenaud, as well as Will Power getting caught up in a big old schmozzle down there, Kanan with the ARCA brakes as well, unfortunately taking Pato Award kind of as the innocent bystander. But this caused Will Power to continue to have a bad season, or at least it looked like at the time. Because not only was he, in my opinion, my humble opinion, he was the cause of the accident, his car stopped on the track, essentially giving him the penalty that race control didn't want to give him. So it looked like Will was completely out of the race. It looked like he was going to lose a lap, he was going to be done, and that was one of, or actually two of Penske's hopes out of the race in one corner. However, the story of Will Power was just fascinating to watch throughout this race, because eventually the guy found a way to get to third with a gearbox that apparently he had to blip on the upshift. So it was a lot like a true manual transmission where, you can't just flat foot it when you're shifting gears. You have to blip the throttle, and of course in a real manual transmission you also touch the clutch pedal to get the car in gear. So apparently the car would not get into gear unless he was lifting off the throttle every single time. Despite that, he was still passing people, he was still flying up through the field, and like I said, the guy got a podium. One of the best drives in a very long time in IndyCar, assuming that gearbox stayed broken the entire race. Wow. I mean, we've known that Will Power is a true champion. I think that's been obvious for a while, and it became very clear when he won his Indy 500 to those who who still didn't consider him that. But a performance like what he did today, that deserves exceptional amounts of praise. I would also like to heap some exceptional amounts of praise on Firestone. Now, some of you younger fans may or may not remember that the street races in IndyCar used to be some of the worst. Nobody really enjoyed street racing. It always seemed to be pretty boring, mundane races that were usually dominated by one or two cars. In the modern day, we've seen just incredible amounts of overtaking, so much passing, so much alternate strategy, so many different leaders and lead changes. And a lot of that comes down to Firestone willing to take risks on their choice of compound selection for the red and black tires, the soft and the hard compounds. And we saw such a huge delta between a fast lap on the reds versus a fast lap on the blacks. And in fact, the fact that the red tires, the soft compound, were actually able to fall off very quickly. In fact, in the first stint, we saw massive amounts of fall off for a couple of the leaders, namely Scott Dixon and Spencer Piggott, so much so that they caused an accident. We'll talk about that in just a second. But that kind of change between the cars and seeing the cars change over a stint like that really led to a lot of exciting racing. And again, it was just another aspect for these drivers to manage, and it was really exciting. It definitely led to an interesting race. And by the way, one of the guys who kind of benefited from tire strategy, not really a surprise because he's driving for Dale Coyne Racing, and of course Dale Coyne managed to get a win for Carlos Huertas, but I think he's a little bit better than Carlos Huertas. I love saying his name even if I don't say it right. Is Santino Ferrucci, old Santucci. Now I'll have to talk about him a little bit later when I talk about the Indy 500 more in depth, but I think Dale's faith in Santucci has really been rewarded. Obviously, he's had personal problems, and I don't need to remind you of that. Everybody knows that. Everybody has made an opinion about Santino Ferrucci. His performances in the cockpit, which ultimately on race day are the only thing that matters, they have been consistent, they've been fast, and he hasn't made a whole lot of mistakes this year. And he could be the rookie of the year, which is very strange to consider when you've got Marcus Ericsson and Felix Rosenqvist and a rookie who has actually won a race this year, Colton Herta. But the consistency award right now is going to Santino Ferrucci because he's just been doing that, just banging it out really well. Speaking of Santino Ferrucci and Dale Coyne Racing, his teammate Sebastian Bourdais did not have a very good day. In fact, went airborne when he hit the back of Spencer Piggott. Piggott was coming into the pits on off-the-cliff red tires, and up in the air went Sebastian. Obviously, when any time an open-wheel car gets up in the air, you kind of hold your breath, and luckily Sebastian didn't hit anything, and neither did Spencer, despite clobbering the entrance to the pit wall. So a couple of lucky breaks there for sure. But again, boy, it's good to see them get out of that. And then kind of once you got back to racing, it was again tires. It was, when do you want to pit for the alternate reds? When do you want to get off of the alternate reds? And we saw Joseph Newgarden and Alexander Rossi and James Hinchcliffe kind of become the guys who were leading on strategy, quote unquote. And Newgarden and Rossi pitted early to try to undercut everybody, but they got caught in traffic. So James Hinchcliffe had a couple of laps where he was much faster than them on track because he was in clean air. So they brought Hinchcliffe in, and out he comes out of the pits Brilliant strategy by the Arrow Schmidt-Peterson team. They got him out ahead of Newgarden and Rossi, but unfortunately, there were more balls than brains as the two of them, meaning Newgarden and Rossi, decided to cowboy it on the inside, and all three of them didn't make turn 3. A pretty spectacular accident where you see, I mean, it's very rare where you see one of the leaders crash. It's even more rare when two of them, when three of them all crashed at the same time under green flag conditions after a long stint. I mean, that was unbelievable. And again, it happened naturally. It wasn't like this was on a restart or anything. The three guys ended up all together, and they ended up all together in the tire barrier. Newgarden was essentially taken out of the race, though he did return later. Hinchcliffe eventually returned to the race, but he fell out of the race, I think, with a gearbox problem. It seems like when the cars make contact, their gearboxes are fragile. But Alexander Rossi just kept going because he's Alexander Rossi, and the guy is just unfazed about everything, even a crash in turn 3. But it definitely put Rossi back, and I think it definitely took him out of the race. But the strategy really started to shift around to some other drivers that were going to benefit. Surprisingly, considering where he was yesterday, it was Scott Dixon who had cycled to the front of the field, and then you had Marcus Ericsson, of all people. Schmidt-Peterson Motorsports, I mean, Hinchcliffe was having one of the better races he's had in a very long time, and Marcus Ericsson finally starting to look like he's making good on some of the promise that a lot of people were hoping for him. Of course, he is in the car that Robert Wickens did so well in last year, even if the number's a little bit different. There was a lot of expectation on Marcus Ericsson, and he delivered on it today. Now he certainly got snookered by Dixon on the restarts. There's no doubt about it. But at the same time, you can't expect that a guy who doesn't have a lot of experience in kind of the close quarters IndyCar style racing to really be able to face down Scott Dixon. That takes a huge amount of talent and commitment and experience. And that's just simply what Marcus Ericsson didn't have, and so he wasn't really able to challenge Dixon. Dixon was, pulling away pretty well, even though Ericsson was kind of clawing back a little bit. And then we had Felix Rosenquist pilot into the wall. As we've seen a couple of times, not only at Detroit, but I think specifically the last time this was done was at Detroit in 2017. IndyCar threw a red flag to try to get a green flag finish. My unpopular opinion is that it didn't really matter. They don't really need to do that. I don't mind a race ending under yellow. It didn't change the result. And if it's all about the fans, we need the fans to have a great experience. Well, then why did you deny the fans half of a race yesterday when it wasn't going to finish on NBC anyway? Why didn't you just run a full race yesterday if it was all about the fans? But We'll just leave it at that. I don't need to rant about that, and that's already going to be unpopular enough because of we need my green flag finish. But it was Scott Dixon who managed to win the race, and it's just the most Scott Dixon thing in the world, isn't it? Because he crashed on his own. I think NBC said he's only crashed 25 times in his whole career, and that's a career that spans all the way back to 2001. Wow. I'd like to look at any race car driver who has raced for that long and had that few accidents. And I don't even think they counted the ones, or I think in that 25, that also counts the accidents that somebody else's fault that he was involved in. If you whittle that number way down and say just Scott Dixon crashes, I bet it'd be probably 10 or lower. So we saw something really rare yesterday. We saw something a lot more common today. In fact, think about his win ratio to his crash ratio. Maybe we should start judging drivers based on that. I mean, that's just... I'm trying to think about that, and we really need to appreciate Scott Dixon because, and I said this I think last year, we really are watching one of the greatest of all time. And seeing him do stuff like this and make recoveries like this, I think kind of proves how good he is, what a special driver he is. And, even though he complains about race control and everybody hates that, and I certainly do, he's kind of earned that right because he's just so darn good. But yeah, it was Scott Dixon winning after crashing on day one, and we had Newgarden who won yesterday. So Newgarden kept the pole. The pole. Well, he won the pole today, but he kept the points position over Alexander Rossi. So it looks like at the moment we've got American versus American at the top of the charts, and the two drivers who really are kind of the two American standouts that have kind of come through the IndyCar ladder in the last 4 or 5 years. So it should be a fun season ahead. I hope you will stick around with me. Texas next week. God only knows what's going to happen at Texas. Oftentimes, Texas sucks. Sometimes it's amazing. In fact, before they reconfigured the track, it was usually amazing. We'll have to see how the new aero changes to the super speedways will affect Texas Motor Speedway. I hope it's not a pack race, but at the same time, I hope it's not a super strung out race where nobody can pass. I hope it's somewhere in between where the fast guys can go faster than the slow guys, but the fast guys can also pass the slow guys or pass some of the fast guys as well, and we probably have a pretty good race. So thank you guys so much for watching. This has been David Land on YouTube. Subscribe for more IndyCar and motorsport content, and I will see you in the next video.